So Twisters was directed by Lee Isaac Chung and it stars Daisy Edgar Jones, Glenn Powell, Anthony Ramos, and it's about another group of storm chasers who travel down to Tornado Alley where a bunch of tornadoes have been breaking out and such, and they try to learn about them, they try to capture them, they try to experience them, and try various other things. So this is a movie that I was kind of looking forward to for a few reasons. One, I do admittedly enjoy the original Twister. Not the greatest movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a fun guilty pleasure. I kind of enjoy disaster movies as a guilty pleasure, and usually they kind of rely on visuals, and usually the visuals in this movie are pretty creative and they're over the top, and they're really ridiculous and such. And I kind of been wondering like why we haven't been getting a lot of disaster movies, especially in the last few years, either because people stopped liking them, people started making fun of them a lot, or maybe because disaster movies have kind of played out a little too much in the real world. But that's beside the point. Two, I was curious because the cast sounded interesting. Glenn Powell, Daisy Edgar Jones, Anthony Ramos. It has a lot of recognizable names. Also, Lee Isaac Chung directed this movie. If you don't remember his name, he previously directed Minari, which got him an Oscar nomination. I was curious to see like what he was doing in this movie. Was this going to be like a little bit more of a grounded storyline, or was this going to be like in the terms of blockbuster? From the trailers, it looked like it was going to be more of a blockbuster, but while watching this movie, you definitely get the sense that this is more of a grounded movie. It's definitely more. I would say it's definitely more human. I won't go as far as to say it's like, I don't know, like compared to the Batman Begins, like a bit where it's like, oh, that took a more serious approach to some of these movies. And I don't know if Twisters is that far, but I definitely enjoyed it for the most part. I would say I definitely enjoyed this movie a lot more after thinking about it for a couple days. But let's start off what I do like about this movie. First off, the two actors are pretty fantastic. The two leads, Daisy Edgar Jones and Glenn Powell, you definitely believe their characters. You definitely buy their performances and such. You definitely their chemistry is pretty well done, and you definitely understand like why they're bonding and such. I would honestly say they have better chemistry than Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton in the original. Some of the other actors do fine, like Anthony Ramos does fine. Another actor who is kind of like there to kind of like learn about these storm chasers and such, or tornado wranglers as they call them in this movie. He has a few funny moments here and there. The visuals are also pretty impressive. They kind of get better as the movie goes on and such. And by the third act, they are pretty creative and such, and they're pretty intense. It kind of made me want to think, it's like, maybe I should go check this out in IMAX or RPX or something like that, because like that sounds like it would be a real fun time. That would be intense. But I do think the visuals themselves are pretty creative, and again, they kind of just get better as the movie goes on. I do kind of like how it kind of shows, like, even though this movie's still like a disaster movie and it can still kind of be like intense and fun and such, the movie doesn't shy away from like how tragic a lot of these things are. You kind of see like various scenes where they're kind of like trying to help people and such, but you also kind of see how tragedies like this can be exploited and such. And I do think that's pretty interesting comparing to like what the original Twister was like. They kind of don't really talk about that too much. They kind of address it a little bit in the original, but they never really go deep with it. And I would say kind of like what I expected, especially considering Lee Isaac Chung's previous movie Minari. This is definitely more of a human story, more of a grounded storyline than what I expected, or what most people would probably expect. And I do think it kind of helps us to understand at least the two main characters a little bit more. It definitely kind of feels, admittedly, a little bit slower, but I will talk about that in a bit. But I also feel like this movie is pretty much still a fun thrill ride, even though it's like a little bit slower in parts. I still think like when the action goes down, it's still pretty fun. And also, I was worried that this movie was just going to be just another rehash of the original Twister. It's not, but I would say the movie keeps the callbacks to a minimum. Like, there are definitely some callbacks, like there's reference to Dorothy, and they kind of expand on that a little bit. The main character also is kind of dealing with some sort of tragedy in some way, and I do think those are the callbacks I actually do like, where they basically, they do their own thing with something that was previously done, but kind of make it their own in some way. I feel like that's what callbacks should be. They should not just be ripped from the original and just redone again in the new one. That's just kind of lazy to me. That's kind of something that just Disney does. But like, this is not Disney, obviously, but I kind of use Disney as an example of that. But let's talk about some of the things I don't like about this movie. First off, I couldn't care for most of the side characters in this movie. Some of the side characters are kind of recognizable at times, but most of these side characters just have no personality whatsoever. Even some of the side characters in the original movie, played by some well-known actors like Philip Seymour Hoffman, Alan Ruck, Carrie Elways, they weren't great characters by any means, but they at least had personality. Everyone in that movie at least had personality. But some of these characters don't really have much to do. Even David Corenswet, who's going to be the new Superman next year, there is a twist in the very end of the movie involving his character, and it comes out of nowhere. If I'm being honest, it's like, why'd you do that? It kind of doesn't really make sense. They don't really build up to it. It's just kind of a moment. I don't understand. And also, there's kind of like a subplot involving like a villainous bad guy who's, I won't spoil it by any means, but it just kind of feels like comes out of nowhere and it never really feels fully resolved. It's just kind of an extra subplot that's just thrown in there. And also, I didn't like the fact that they don't really talk about like climate change surprisingly in this movie. Now I know that's a very hot button subject, no pun intended, but at the same time it's like you would think that like with all the storms that have kind of been happening in the last few years, people would kind of like look at a new Twisters movie and be like, are they going to address like how crazy these storms have gotten? Like they've gotten crazier since 1996 when the original Twister came out. But they don't really do that. There is like a brief mention, someone is in denial of various things and such, but it kind of comes off as a joke more than anything else. And I was like, you could expand on that a little bit, but they don't, unfortunately. And again, there are a few pacing issues here and there, and I feel like this movie's 2 hours long. Maybe it should have been a little shorter than that, maybe like an hour 40, hour 45, maybe. You can definitely trim a lot of these scenes, but it's still a mostly fun ride. And again, there are some awkward moments, some comedy it just falls flat. Like there's this one during a massive storm in a hotel. You'll know when you see it, but it just has two obnoxious characters who are clearly stupid. They're just doing stupid things, and it's like it's just not funny. It's like, are you kidding me right now? Is this really what you want to be doing right now during what's going on right now? Okay, it's not funny. It's just awkward. Um, a lot of disaster movies admittedly have a lot of awkward comedy, but this was some of the worst I've seen in a while. So Twisters, even though I do have some issues with the pacing, even though I have some issues with the side characters and some of the plots and how they don't really talk about climate change that much, and also some awkward comedy here and there, I still think it's a fun thrill ride overall. The visuals are incredible. The acting is still decent enough. The main characters are at least likable enough. There is an element where it shows like, these disasters are tragic, they are upsetting, and they kind of feel like people can exploit them and such. I do think that also I do like how they kind of show like how storm chasing has changed a bit. It's like you have some people who are not really professionals getting in there and kind of like doing whatever they want with it. It's like that kind of has changed a lot in the last few years, hasn't it? Like you would think like obviously the people in the original Twister, they weren't really professional, but they knew what they were talking about. Whereas like these people are not professional and hardly don't know what they're talking about at times. But I thought that was interesting. I do think the acting is at least decent. The visuals are good. The ideas that it kind of throws out there are surprisingly good and surprisingly deeper for a disaster movie and such. I would still recommend it. You may not like this movie if you are a diehard fan of the original Twister. Like this movie feels like a vastly different movie than most people are probably expecting. But I still mostly enjoyed it. I think I enjoy it a lot more now than I did when I first watched it. I was like, at first I was like, yeah, this is fine, but a few issues here and there. But like most of my issues now are kind of just, I don't want to say they're gone, but like I'm not as upset about them as I was when I was watching it. So I'll give Twisters 3 out of 4 stars. See it. So, what's your favorite disaster movie? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.